So I will get started. My name is Nichole P. I'm the Information Security Officer at Mary Greely Medical Center. I also am the Contracts Counsel. So I am a lawyer who ended up in IT. So it's been definitely an adventure. I have a marketing degree from Iowa State, so go Cyclones. And then I went to law school at Michigan State, so also go Spartans. Sometimes when the Cyclones disappoint me, the Spartans come in pretty strong, so I can appreciate that. So I graduated from law school in 2005, so I've been a lawyer for 15 years. I was licensed first in Texas. I was licensed in South Dakota, and I'm currently licensed in Iowa and Texas still. So I have had an interesting path to get where I am currently. Did a lot of contracts work throughout my career, and I briefly ran a nonprofit when I lived in Austin, and that was kind of how I ended up in healthcare IT. At the time that I had the opportunity to join Mary Greely, I was working at a bankruptcy firm in Dallas. And bankruptcy laws were changing throughout the country. And then it seemed as if some of our book of business was going to go away. And in fact, I think 6 weeks after I left that organization, they did a mass round of layoffs. And so, as we all know, cybersecurity is not going anywhere. So I felt like that was better job security in the end. And so that's how I came to join Mary Greely. So they were looking for someone to review their policies and procedures and some of their processes and weigh in with a HIPAA interpretation and say, this is okay, and this is not okay, et cetera. So it has been an interesting an interesting time. The learning curve has been essentially vertical. So not only did I join healthcare more intensely than I had participated previously, then it was my first time officially in an IT department. So I think the first thing that struck me was not only the acronyms in IT, but then add hospital acronyms on top of that. So while you're talking about PHI I'm talking about protected health information, and they're like, oh, we want to talk about the preventable harm index. So there's two whole layers of acronyms that I still, to this day, I'm like, what's a CLAPSI? What's a HAPI? And those are medical terms that I hear occasionally. So it's been, really interesting. And then a lot of it is just been learned out of my own curiosity and to figure it out on my own. It has been at times incredibly intimidating to be in some of those rooms when I don't have as much technical knowledge as other people. So that's been a challenge and something I've been working on with our current CIOs to get better at the technical aspects of what I do. Oftentimes, I would say at this point in information security in my position, I'm not necessarily an anomaly because the lack of technical knowledge helps me communicate with the business. So if there's a really technical conversation happening, I will get a Teams chat from one of the leaders and say, can you just water this down for me and tell me what I really need to know in order to move forward? What do I really need to do? And so that happens on occasion. I sometimes find myself as an interpreter for some of the more technical conversations. So I'm trying to think what else. So a lot of it's been, self-taught, figuring it out, and figuring out that very quickly that, cybersecurity is not just about HIPAA. It's cybersecurity. And so that has been an interesting transition and also an interesting transition for the medical center because I've been there 5 years officially, and, ransomware was barely a zygote at the time in the healthcare world. There was not any awareness or knowledge about it. And so now it's something we talk about on a daily basis, and it's been really interesting to see how ransomware has affected the healthcare industry. So, when you get into things like ransomware, it becomes, even more than the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It becomes then about the safety. So if we don't have access to our medical record or the systems that we use to treat our patients, then it puts our patient safety in jeopardy. A couple examples, and maybe you know about these, so I apologize if this is something you know about, but a while back, I think it was NotPetya in the summer of 2017, there was a healthcare organization that lost their entire network in 7 minutes. They didn't have their medical record access for 36 hours. They didn't have a radiology department for 2 weeks. They couldn't bill for 2 months. And so oftentimes for smaller organizations, Mary Greely excluded, that then becomes a cash flow situation for that organization. And then, of course, it cost them $6.7 million. So there's all that fun on top of it. And then this past fall, CISA and the FBI released a statement saying, there is a credible risk to healthcare specifically. And one of the organizations that had ransomware during that time was an organization in Virginia. I'm not remembering exactly where, but the New York Times did an interview of an oncology nurse who likened that time frame to working at a Boston hospital after the Boston Marathon bombing. And I apologize for the dog noises in the back. This is a very active time of day. So that's a pretty large statement to me, and that's something that really hit home with our clinical staff, because that is a struggle, is getting across to the clinical staff that cybersecurity is important, because they just want to just treat their patients. They're like 14-character passwords, no ma'am. And so we just want to make security to make it as easy as possible to be as secure as we possibly can. And then so in that same interview, she had said, or someone had said, that they were only able to treat 1 in 4 patients for, I think it was a month, but I'd have to clarify that. And then they were rebuilding oncology treatments from memory. So that is the point where the stakes are a little bit different in healthcare when it comes to that. So I guess I'm trying to think of other things that you guys would want to know about.
Well, I have a question or two if you can riff off of those.
Absolutely. Sorry, I just was going strong there.
Yeah. Well, I suppose more of a administrative thing. Can you see the chat at all?
Yes, I can. I saw the test.
All right. Yes. So I just sent that.
Okay, perfect.
I don't know. Sometimes we've had better luck with asking questions when people are speaking. If we can just throw it in the chat and they can get to it when they get to it. So we'll see if that's something that actually happens. Everything's up in the air with.
Well, it's really funny. We use Teams primarily, and I was in an actual physical meeting the other day, and I was like, "There's no hand raising. I don't know what to do with myself." So go for it.
So yeah, we've seen a lot of the ransomware and those sorts of attacks going after hospitals and healthcare facilities and whatnot. And I was kind of curious if you had any idea of what would need to change to have that the ransomware targets move to somewhere else, or to stop just in general for healthcare. Like, what needs to happen there?
I mean, I think that it's really interesting what's happening in healthcare right now, and that is they're really focusing more on interoperability and being able to move patient information from one organization to another organization more easily. I think that then it might become less valuable, because, of course, patient information is far more valuable than credit card information, because you can build a whole person out of that information and get treated as a person. It's really interesting. The Daily did a podcast this morning about NFTs and talking about blockchain, of course. And so I really think that the only way that healthcare data is really going to end up as secure as possible is if the medical records start to move toward a blockchain type of model. Or if there's something that makes it less valuable, or if an extreme measure, which seems more likely than all of these things put together, is if the federal government created some type of like a more stringent privacy and security law that's more, exactly. um, they create a security law that's more prescriptive than, what they already have, something like the GDPR that they have in Europe. So yes, interoperability and privacy, it is a fine line. And so our medical director, not medical director, our medical record director is always like, we are going to be fined for interoperability violations if we don't do this and this and this. And I'm saying, but HIPAA privacy. And so it is a fine line that we are walking, and CMS, who drives interoperability on behalf of the healthcare industry, they are very focused on interoperability. And like, you might want to talk to your friends across the hall, that are at the Office of Civil Rights who are working on HIPAA. Recently, the Office of Civil Rights did they did a comment period on potential changes made that could be made to HIPAA in order to serve our patients better, because sometimes it does hinder patient care in order to, make sure their data is private. Or someone approached me today and said, I want to engage this company that can help our patients obtain medical coverage for genetic testing. So I was like, oh man, I don't think that fits under an exception. And then, of course, there's a bunch of research that ends up following. Recently, I was on a webinar where I believe it was the Cook's Children's CIO had put together a graphic. I could probably actually pull it up if I can find it, about all the different regulations that feed into healthcare. And so I think there are some that would say that healthcare IT is the same as all other IT. And I think it is a little more nuanced and gray than, say, manufacturing or something like that. What would be the incident handling plan in a ransomware attack? So in fact, I'm working on a project to completely overhaul our incident response policies, because a lot's happened since they were written and the environment's changed, and the pandemic has changed some of the ways we operate. So anytime we have had any kind of incident, whether it be, in fact, a year and a half ago, we had a sand failure. So that was a true delight. And so anytime we've had an incident, we always just pull together. Now we're using Teams for that. It used to be like in a physical room. And then we work with incident command at the hospital level. And so we have essentially a go-between that hospital incident command and then our own technical incident command. And so this is something that we have to work on as an organization, is making sure that's more formalized. But a small example of that is, we had a director call today and say, I got a strange email this morning. I'm having issues with my device. And I got this really strange phone call that this random guy was asking me just strange questions. And so she said, putting those all together, I think maybe that I've been hacked. And so in that situation, we sent somebody up. Well, I said, unplug it from the wall, please. We sent somebody up with a replacement laptop, and I hopped on the phone with our security, our more technical security resource, and he went through Carbon Black and for that device, and then he looked at our instance of Logarithm in order to determine whether something had actually been deployed on that device. And then what we did is we brought it and put it in quarantine and looked at it, and, just to kind of double check that there was nothing going on. So it's kind of just pulling the minds together and then going from there. I would say I referenced the CISA and FBI thing from this past fall, and that actually ended up being a good thing for us, because we had a lot of security projects in the hopper that were going through the process, and I have to go firefight this, so I'm falling, I might be falling behind on this. And we sat and we focused on security for, I think it was 3 days straight, and we made a lot of progress on several different projects at that point. But that was a similar situation. We sat in a room and we said, what's the situation? What do we know? What can we do? And then we come back and say, what's been executed? What are next steps? I worry about nation state attacks more than solo bad actors, especially given everything that's going on in the environment with FireEye and SolarWinds, both products that we use. And we had to sit down and firefight those incidents and go through all the information and, but I definitely worry about nation state attacks because of SolarWinds and firepower. And also because the restrictions from the federal government surrounding those nation state attacks are so much more restrictive. I forget what additional federal agency it was that came out recently and said, we have a list of people that you can't pay if you have ransomware. And so, as we know, you can't always determine who's on the other end right away. And so that's sometimes the debate, like, do you pay, do you not pay? And personally, I lean towards not paying, but then because if you pay, they still might publish your information or you don't get it back. But oftentimes it is because of nation states. I think NotPetya or WannaCry was Ukraine. And so you don't know who you're paying at that time. And so then insurance gets involved and they're very specific about nation state attacks. So it just becomes that much more restrictive, and that's why I worry about that one. Our IT group so as a whole, we are Mary Greely IT. That is information systems. That's also our clinical application systems department, and they are devoted to the medical record. And then we have a business intelligence department. And so altogether, we are Mary Greely IT. So I think that's about 60 people. I would say the IS group is probably about half of that. And then primarily focused on security, it's just yours truly, the non-technical person in the room. So we have our IS department broken down into several areas. So there's an infrastructure team, there's an interface team, there's a networking team, and then security pulls from all of those different teams, because we always say, security is everybody's job. And so we pull together as a group once a week. And so we have one person who's going to be trending more toward being completely devoted to security for obvious reasons, but it's healthcare. It's tough to get resources for humans, but when there's something that we want to do, the organization is very supportive. They're very cognizantly aware of cybersecurity and its threat to the organization, its threat to our sustainability. And so they're very supportive in that way if we want funding for something as expensive as Carbon Black or Logarithm or SolarWinds. So we're lucky in that way. We haven't done a ton of red team type testing. We've done a lot of tabletops, and that's something we need to move toward. I should probably clarify, when I started at Mary Greely 5 years ago, they had zero official security program. They weren't training on cybersecurity and orientation, or there was no computer-based learning. People are very much like, what's phishing? And so it's been a slow boulder to push up a large mountain. So, but red team testing is something we need to move toward. Interestingly enough, a lot of the people in our IS department did not come from IS backgrounds. And I think that's also unusual about our particular group, but also I think in my experience across healthcare IT teams. And there are people that have, especially at Mary Greely, one of my coworkers started as she's a nurse, and she's been at the organization for 45, 47 years or something crazy like that. So she went from clinical throughout a very long clinical career. And then when the organization started adding more software and hardware and electronics, she started doing some training on those. And now she's the lead of our interface team. And so we have a lot of people that kind of came up through the trenches. A lot of the clinical applications team are nurses or former nurses. And so that really helps put the business spin on it for me, is to go to them and say, this is what this workflow is going to look like. And they're like, we can't do that. That's going to be too much. Plan on contracted red team or doing an internal team. I would do both. Honestly, I'd be definitely interested in doing both. And if that's something that you guys do, I think at one point I spoke to someone about doing some of that with you guys, and then I don't think it ever came to fruition. But if that's something you guys would be interested in, we'd be most likely lovely to have you, probably with a fairly tight NDA.
What exactly do you mean us doing that?
Oh, like
as a club?
Yeah, no, I know that Iowa State does some of those exercises, red versus blue team exercises. And so if that's something, I know, don't you guys have like a hackathon and different things like that?
We have a cyber defense competition that happens every semester, which would sort of be the students be the blue team and whatnot. And we have other outside members come in with as red team.
They're the red team. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think
the red team.
There's at least a couple of our members who are, myself included, that are really interested in more of the red team side of stuff. I was just kind of surprised when you said like having the university students coming in and trying it out.
Well, right. It would have to be like, you'd have to demonstrate some extreme experience, because I've worked with pen testers who have tanked my network, and I'm like, it's 4 a.m. and I'm going to murder you. And this is a healthcare organization and not, this isn't a bank. So yeah, it would be definitely like, you would have to demonstrate some experience or something. Like if we could do like an example exercise or a tabletop or something like that. So.
Yeah, I feel like that'd be a little bit more safe. I mean, so I'm the president and a junior, and I probably have I have more experience than most probably in red teaming, mm-hmm. And I wouldn't trust myself on any network that couldn't survive several hours of downtime.
Yeah, and to be honest, I have no idea what your skill level, your guys' like different areas or skill levels are. I thought that you guys had an active red team at Iowa State, so I think I was confused on what the previous like blue team versus red team exercise was. So apologies.
Yeah, I wish we did too.
Okay.
Yeah, we're a fast growing program. We just created a new major, but this is primarily undergrads here. So you're thinking 18 to young 20 sums. So we're more aspiring than masters at this
point.
There
we go. Okay.
One question that kind of came up in one of the previous classes I've taken on more of the business aspect is kind of the difference between actually being secure and being compliant to like HIPAA and other regulations. And I was wondering if you had any experience with like tension between those two.
So I think that when I started, incredibly naively, that I was focused on the compliance, and it very quickly became clear to me that, of course, HIPAA is not very restrictive. So what framework are we going to go after instead? So now they have basically fully endorsed the NIST cybersecurity framework. And so then, in my opinion, they're finally becoming more prescriptive. So they haven't changed the law to say you have to follow NIST guidelines. They have issued a recommendation. And when it's coming from the Office of Civil Rights as a recommendation, it's kind of like, if you're not doing this and you have a breach, you're going to get fined for not doing this, even though it's a recommendation. Because originally HIPAA was not prescriptive at all, and there's different ways to be compliant without being secure. So many of the things in HIPAA are, recommended and not like you have to absolutely do this. And for whatever reason, I'm forgetting the verbiage. And so definitely compliance is here and security is here, in my opinion. And that is, I think, part of why healthcare continues to struggle with IT all around.
I just thought of something. Do you guys have like IT internships at all? Because I'm going to be graduating next, not this coming May, but the May after. Same boat as Nick. And just curious what you guys had available. I'm coming from the MI
Yes.
side of things, from the IS realm. So,
Yeah, very cool. We actually just started doing that this year, and I was going to send them to Nick to post on your Slack channel. And then we had a flood of applicants because we ended up posting them on SciHire. So this summer we're doing uh, two like IT interns. And so it's more of, they're working on a network refresh at the moment. And so they're going to be changing out some wireless access points. And then I have a cybersecurity intern coming at the end of May. And we are going to work on formalizing some hardening standards, some incident response policy, process, documentation, follow up, documentation as a whole. And then, one of the biggest threats in healthcare is the Internet of Things / our biomed devices. And so I think then we would move on to it's something we have to get our arms around because again, healthcare is like really late to the game on some of those items. A lot of that stuff just exploded at one time and we just don't have a great handle on it.
I know I've heard some stuff about like old operating systems, significantly out of date stuff being prevalent in a lot of areas, but particularly healthcare. Like, how true is that?
Before 20 minutes before I hopped on this call, I was talking about with our IT architect about a device that is XP embedded. So, very true. And oftentimes, a director will just buy something and say, it just needs to get plugged in. And it doesn't need the network, it just needs wireless. And I'm like, we recently discovered an unpatched Windows 7 device that was on our public Wi-Fi. So it is definitely true, and it's something again. And those are what I would consider like the biomed devices. It's because for a long time they were just like, just get it done, as opposed to make it secure while you're getting it done. So yeah, we definitely, as sometimes it feels like a daily basis, discover something like that. I am no floppy disks, nope. But doing workflows with USB, right? Which is the new old floppy disk. I don't even know. So we are looking at doing like a biomed specific risk assessment in order to make sure we understand where everything is and then go back and, re-architect and make sure everything is appropriately isolated and appropriately secured.
I was going to try to figure out a talk on doing sort of a industrial controls talk here. And I was kind of crossed my mind if you ever looked at sort of how the industrial controls do like safety critical, like they do their network architecture. Because I was wondering if there'd be any crossover there, seeing that stuff can't fail there or else planes crash and stuff can't fail here or else people don't get treated.
Right. And I think that I can't speak too specifically to that, but I think that we're starting to see a lot of healthcare or a lot of crossover, excuse me. I was on a webinar recently and they were referencing specifically some manufacturing guidelines and saying healthcare absolutely should adopt these. And so I think it's just one of those things where healthcare just continues to flounder because there's nothing, again, that's super prescriptive on like how you should be doing this in order to get these results other than the frameworks, right? Like NIST, CIS, et cetera. There's starting to be more crossover and acknowledging what other industries are doing. So our architect and our CIO came from manufacturing, and they're like, look, we understand that healthcare is more nuanced, but you can still apply some of these same basic principles um, because they're best practice. God, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but you mentioned a couple of times about having like a standard being prescriptive and like sort of saying this is what you need to do. And I was kind of curious, um, like, do you like why would having a government standard over like these are the things you need to do be more beneficial than having just sort of a industry best practice set? If I've understood what you've been saying.
Yeah, I think just for the purpose of enforcement, I think that's really all, because, if we violate CMS guidelines, we can potentially lose our license to function. And so if there were different, or so there was a hospital in Des Moines a couple of years ago that had a 1.7 million patient breach. They've already settled a class action lawsuit, and they haven't even been investigated by the Office of Civil Rights yet. And so that's 2021. I think that happened in 2018. So they're essentially they're more than 3 years behind on their investigations, probably more now with the pandemic. But I think it's just that level of enforcement that people would, especially in healthcare, just stand up and be like, okay, we really have to do this. Because go ahead.
I was just going to say, so that would just be helpful with making like the case to management for doing something.
Yep, definitely. Absolutely. Because if you look at Europe and GDPR, they came out of the gate. I think maybe the first month that they implemented it, they fined Facebook millions of dollars. So people really have taken the GDPR seriously. And I think that there are states that are taking privacy and security seriously. Like California has the most, on a state level, has the most stringent. But that's the thing, that where the federal level would help, because each state has their own set of guidelines, and each state has their own reporting requirements. And so if there were something that were umbrella, that would be helpful, I think. So if we have a breach, we have to, if we have we have patients from in all 50 states, considering the fact that it's a university town. We have to report to those patients on the state level. So if California requires 72 hours, that's our notification window for California upon discovery. So we will have students working part-time throughout the year. And as far as the medically, not at all, that insulin pumps or pumps generally are a great example. I was at a conference one time and they were talking about how 2 patients came in from a horrible car accident and they recovered, but they left as morphine addicts because they figured out how to hack their own medication pumps, because they had left the organization had left the standard generic password open on it. And so yes, that's definitely something that we are looking at. And that's why it's so important for us to get our arms around our biomedical devices and situation. There was another one where they have, that they have all the mannequins that for CPR, et cetera. So those now connect to the network, which is a fun advancement. And I heard a story of somebody somehow they downloaded a poker or card playing software, which ended up giving their network malware. So yes, we are acutely aware of those, and it is something that we need to fix, or get better at, I should say, get better at.
How many of those insulin pump things are connected to phones or networks, or have the possibility to be touched remotely?
Too many. We have about 3,000 devices. I couldn't tell you offhand how many of those are officially networked. Um, because even we have treadmills that are on network. And so that's part of what we've been talking about lately is appropriately getting those devices isolated. And so that's the part that we have to get better at because then, so we don't own the biomedical devices. Our facilities biomed team does that. And so they aren't as cognizant of patching because if they're running on, an old OS like the XP embedded device or the Windows 7, then that's a huge vulnerability for organizations. And so we have a lot of them that are networked and some probably that don't necessarily need to be so. So that is what we're looking at right now. So don't try to med hack us after this. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, I think I've always seen attacks that can have really physical impacts be always the scariest ones. Like I've seen cars, like attacks making cars like turn the wheel going down the highway type of thing.
Yep.
But the scary ones like the insulin pump, like I'm not as familiar with medical aspects of it, but I feel like on for always is not the way you want your insulin pump going. So I could see that as being an incredibly scary thing for people who rely on that sort of medical equipment.
And there was one recently, I'm forgetting what device it was, that was pertaining to, it was for your heart that they were saying was becoming insecure and they were releasing, I can't remember all the details of that particular one, but yes, those are the scary ones. Because they can, I mean, all of a sudden they're like the hackers essentially bedside controlling things. I don't think it was pacemakers. I don't remember what it was. And so we do put our all of our vendors and including our biomedical device vendors through a third-party risk assessment. So we work with a third party that makes sure they fill out all the appropriate documentation. We would love to see a SOC report. We ask if they have done high trust. And so we request all of that information about how much they're patching and what their password requirements are. And so that is another thing that we were not doing in the past as well. So that is a growing program as because we've done things as they get renewed, and then we've done that with new products. Sorry.
So how long do you think it's going to take for sort of the medical industry as a whole to kind of get up to the standards of a lot of other industries, like time wise?
Um, it's going to take a while, I think. I think that we will see a lot of change in the next 3 to 5 years. I still think that there's not as much that that healthcare is aware of, and also, um, this like super small organizations, like my hometown is 4,000 people. They can't necessarily afford to have anybody do their security. Like, I think they're part of Stanford actually, but um, so it's those smaller organizations that are going to be bigger targets essentially. But I think it's going to take a while because there are, I mean, of 3,000 devices, I'm trying to think of how many companies that spans across. Many. What else would you guys like to know?
I kind of get a good chuckle. We have a kind of a red teaming course that we do here at Iowa State that I'm currently TAing for, and their final project just so happens to be a hospital scenario that they're And so I can completely understand why you would want to vet some of these guys, because we told them in the statement of work, we're like, okay, be careful not to knock over these services because these are very important. And
Right.
so every single day we've been bringing services back up that they've been like spamming Eternal Blue at and just blowing up random things. So yeah, that was kind of funny to me because I was very
Yeah.
kind of on a personal level.
We're a huge target right now. So, but yeah, we're definitely worried about all of that and just getting a handle on it. So. Well, I appreciate your time, guys. Hopefully I wasn't too boring or demonstrated my lack of technical know-how. So it was nice to meet you all.
No,
And
it
if
was
there's
great having you.
yeah, thank you. And if there's any follow-ups, let me know. And if there's any other opportunities for us to partner on something, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll definitely keep your email address in mind. We are approaching the end of the semester, so you probably won't hear anything from us for months until the next one. But I really enjoyed the talk. It's always interesting to sort of get the feel for a different industry and whatnot, and actually how the technical stuff actually impacts real life.
Well, I can say in healthcare, there is never a dull moment, whether it is, I got to deploy baby monitors during COVID because we needed eyes in the room in order to preserve PPE. So it's never a dull moment, whether it's ransomware attacks or a sand failure or a pandemic. We keep it interesting, that's for sure.
All right.
All right. Thanks so much. It was so lovely to meet you all.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.